Welcome to South Asian. I'm Dhaka Tribune editor Zafar Sobhan, and I'm joined in conversation today by the Indian High Commissioner to Bangladesh, His Excellency Vikram Doraiswami, and former Ambassador Tariq Karim, currently the Director of the Center for the Bay of Bengal. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Our subject today is regional connectivity. What are the challenges? Where are we today? And what are the steps forward? So, High Commissioner, if I could start with you, why don't you tell us a little bit about what do you see as the advantages of greater connectivity for the region? I know this is something you have been promoting since you arrived here as High Commissioner, and perhaps earlier as well.
Thank you very much, Zafar. It's a great pleasure to be here, and of course an honor always to share a stage with Ambassador Tariq Karim. Very quickly, when we talk about connectivity, we can effectively break this up into three boxes of connectivity. One is infrastructure connectivity for transport. The other is connectivity for energy. And the third, of course, obviously, is connectivity for people's movement, travel of people. When you really look at the situation we have faced in South Asia, we have allowed for the longest time the sort of continuation of the politics of the past to guide rational economic activity. Rational economic activity suggests that we are better served by better connectivity. And there is evidence to this absolute fact. If you see in the last year and a half, 2 years since the pandemic hit us, we've actually had a greater effort to start using railway rather than just road, for instance. And as a result, trade between India and Bangladesh has skyrocketed, even with all of the existing regulatory and other challenges, logistic challenges that we face. So to me, it is clear that the public wants it, that the economies need it, and now that there is empirical evidence to suggest that this actually does work. The World Bank did a study last year in which it showed, it's called Connecting to Thrive, it showed that if we had seamless connectivity just between Bangladesh and India, for instance, and a free trade arrangement which is being talked about, Bangladesh's exports to India would go up by something in the order of 350%. And national income would rise by as much as 18%. And India's national income would go up by 8%. So these are significant figures. So too with the energy part. Since 2010, 2011, we have, and Ambassador Karim was instrumental in moving that particular thing forward. We've started the process by which India and Bangladesh can actually share or trade in energy. And about 1160 megawatts of power are coming into Bangladesh today from India. These are coming in at prices that are favorable. In other words, therefore, they're economically beneficial, and into regions of Bangladesh which are comparatively, historically, underserved in terms of energy connectivity. Now imagine a more connected South Asia, which involves Bhutan, Nepal, India, and Bangladesh, at least there. If we could expand connectivity in energy, where India and Bangladesh are big consuming nations, and Nepal and Bhutan, by virtue of their geography, are major producing nations. Just on electric power alone, you could have a far greater signature of green climate capacity. In other words, green energy in the entire sub-region. So too with gas, so too with POL products. All of this is already happening. All we need is to push this further forward.
Okay, thank you. If I could bring you into the conversation, please, Ambassador Karim. I think one of the things which the High Commissioner has mentioned is really kind of focusing on this sub-region of India, specifically Eastern India and Northeastern India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan. Talk to me a little bit about why you think that might be a more fruitful strategy when we look at connectivity, than to look at the entire South Asian region, and speak a little bit about successes we have had in connecting up at least this quadrangle over the years.
Thank you, Zafar, and I thank Nagorik for inviting me to share the platform with my good friend, High Commissioner Vikram Doraiswami. We're talking about one South Asia. That's the whole fundamental concept.
That's right.
And you rightly mentioned that today it's perhaps the least integrated region in the world, but we forget that it was the most integrated region in the world until a certain day in August 47, when we ourselves truncated ourselves and split ourselves apart. And this used to be the most integrated region in many ways. The connectivity that Ambassador Doraiswami is talking about, it was there until that particular moment, and then gradually we started uprooting and throwing it apart. Now, why are we focusing only on one part of South Asia, and that's the northeastern part of South Asia? We understood, I think very soon after partition, our leaders understood that we had actually disrupted normal trade and economic activities because we decided to embrace Westphalian hard borders. The hard borders were so hard that they were completely impermeable. Now, you can't have trade unless you have connectivity, unless people meet each other and talk to each other and tell each other what they have to offer to each other. All that suddenly stopped, and we started looking for markets way far away from us. Then, of course, politics came in. SAARC, the attempt at SAARC to form SAARC was basically to see can we recapture what South Asia was before the 15th of August in some sense, particularly in matters of trade and commerce. However, you cannot have trade and commerce unless you have connectivity. Trade and connectivity are handmaidens to each other. One cannot go without the other. And you can talk about everything, so SAFTA, everything sort of fell through because all these barriers to person-to-person connectivity, goods moving across seamlessly, transportation being restored, they stopped. And it's not just goods, it's goods and services. So I think later on, after having grappled so long with the subject, we, for anything to be more than bilateral, it has to be sub-regional. You have to think conceptually, how do you make sub-regional happen? You have to have at least 3 sets of good, fairly strong bilateral relations among countries contiguously located next to each other. Otherwise, it's not going to work. That's how you start with the restoration of connectivity. Our problem was that, we had good relations with Bhutan on one side, we had good relations with Nepal on one side, we had good relations with India on the other side, but they were ups and downs. And I think the breakthrough came, as Ambassador Doraiswami was saying, 2009, when we made a conscious effort that first we put our relations with India back on track. It has to be normal. And once I think that relationship started, the next question was how do we expand this bilateralism into trilateralism and quadrilateralism? And the only way, logical way forward was looking at the northeast of India and east of Bangladesh. So the aim was to start moving in this way because on the western side is the most difficult. Afghanistan having joined SAARC later on, it made it more complicated. On the southern side, there were other challenges already existing. The idea also was that if you can get one sub-region to start moving, then others will probably be interested through internal dynamics in their own politics and aspirations to say, can we join in this part or can we join in the other part? Can we extend connectivity, which is happening now. So that was the way we started. And so the breakthrough, I think, came in 2015 when the BBIN motor vehicles agreement was signed. It was ambitious. It was, in a sense, taking a great leap forward. And then we've had difficulties. And so we are configuring how we can, even within this sub-region, can we split it up into 2 components? BIN, Bangladesh, India, Nepal can start going. Bhutan can join in through multimodal. Because one of the things you have to remember is that the infrastructure that we inherited from the British was superbly designed. It was designed for the British mercantilist. They added the railways to be able to, go across from places where they could not access. Roads were very poor in India, even until the early 20th century. And in this part, it's very difficult to build and maintain roads.
Yes.
So the British had the rivers, They added the railways, and the roads were like the capillaries, which would take goods and services to the distant corners and nooks and bring goods and services from there. So I think we are in that process. Having damaged ourselves, it takes longer to repair a damage. Yeah. I think that is the lesson that comes out of it.
Yeah. Thank you, Ambassador Karim. I mean, I think you raise a great point where you say that our current problems and lack of connectivity is really quite ahistorical. If you look at the great sweep of history and you look at how people have actually lived their lives in this region for hundreds of years, this is actually a relatively recent development. And, you know, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to get back to where we were. You had mentioned that the British had built great infrastructure. And of course, even before the British, the fact remains is the entire region was, as you had mentioned, entirely connected. There were no borders of that sort hindering the movement of goods, hindering the movement of trade, indeed hindering the movement of people. I want to pick up with the High Commissioner, if I could. One of the things which Ambassador Karim had mentioned, he had talked a little bit about BBIN, which for our viewers, let me say, is Bangladesh-Bhutan-India-Nepal, the motor vehicles agreement. And let's talk a little bit about how that might be a vehicle for connectivity. Because I suspect you'd mentioned earlier there was energy connectivity and then transport connectivity. And I think that might be the biggest difficulty. And so how has the MVA been structured in a way to address that issue? Where do things stand now? And how do we move forward with the MVA? If you could use that kind of as a hook to discuss regional connectivity, that would be helpful, I think.
Thank you. So yes, first of all, what is the MVA? The Motor Vehicles Agreement, as configured in the summer of 2015, was divided up into two basic blocks. There's an overlying agreement which sets out the terms and principles, and there are two specialized protocols under it, one for goods vehicles, cargo vehicles, and the other for passenger vehicles. It is essentially structured in a way that will allow the seamless movement of vehicles, but within a quota, recognizing obviously the different size and scales of the four countries concerned, thereby to take on board concerns that, you know, if one larger country or the second comparatively larger country has an unrestricted movement of goods and people and vehicles, it could swamp another country. Yeah. So it's designed quite intelligently that we would agree on specific quotas per month of the number of vehicles that could cross, the categories of vehicles, and of course the other mundane practicalities, insurance, registration, you know, how the legal and regulatory systems would speak to each other. How do you ensure that, say, a truck from, say, hypothetically Nepal has an accident in Bangladesh? What would the liabilities be? You know, those kind of things.
Sure.
So it's a fundamentally very practical document. We've been negotiating those elements and an enabling MOU, which I'm pleased to say finally in March of this year, we reached an understanding. India and Bangladesh have already agreed to the text. We're waiting for Nepal to sign on to it. And the goal was to try and complete this within 6 months. So give or take a little slippage. Hopefully within this year, we will conclude the enabling agreement. We don't have major issues left on the passenger vehicle protocol. And on the goods protocol also, there are some minor issues to be wrapped up, for which we've set up separate working groups of customs and road transport officials. So the goal is, in other words, to come up with something that's practical and practicable to complete this quickly and to create the framework where all four countries can exercise a certain measure of, you know, or at least obtain a certain level of comfort according to how they want to come on board, when they want to come on board, how much they want to put on the table before coming on board. Right. But it's important for me to emphasize this point. This is a valuable mechanism because essentially we already have bilaterals between India and Nepal, between India and Bhutan. So to get these bilaterals converted into at least minilaterals of all four countries is critical to bring on board Bangladesh and also to ensure that Bangladesh, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan eventually can also come on, you know, come into some kind of a cooperative mechanism. With, of course, given the way geography has configured our borders, this will inevitably involve some amount of Indian territory being transited.
Yes.
So that complexity does need to be brought on board. And I think it needs us to recognize in the public domain that this is good for everybody.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There are challenges inherent in the fact that you have 4 countries of different sizes who obviously each of one of these countries will have their specific concerns. So it's quite a challenge as opposed to if it was 4 countries who are roughly of the same size and had roughly the same interests and outlook. Ambassador Karim, I think the High Commissioner raised a very good point about practicality and pragmatism when we talk about this quadrilateral arrangement between the 4 countries, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. Please speak a little to the challenges inherent in this arrangement and how the motor vehicle arrangement could perhaps morph into something which is more practical and how we can move connectivity forward accordingly.
Yes, you see, once we had severed connectivities, now reconnecting it, we find that it more of a challenge than it used to be naturally.
Yes.
And we are adapting to the situation as we move forward. We understand that MVA may not suit everybody in the form that we conceived of.
I see.
You have to build your communication network, the arterial network that you bring, taking into account the geomorphology. You cannot go against the geomorphology of the terrain, where terrain is totally dominated by rivers. You can't be building roads. It's going to be impractical. Similarly, so we are now thinking in terms of multimodality. So we have the MVA. Obviously, that's not going to be scrapped. We are going to tinker with that to make the MVA become multimodal in some way in terms of operationalizing that. And in fact, if I can go back,
please.
After 2015, when that was signed, we were moving forward very smoothly and very, very fast. The joint working group at the joint secretaries level, there were two groups there. One was connectivity, the other was trade and transit and transshipment. And they said, okay, once the MVA has been signed, now we'll start actually doing the runs of the routes identified. We should move forward towards river connectivity and railway connectivity in a similar way, have a similar design. I think you cannot have these 3 separately. You have to think about these being complementary.
Right.
And the minute you get hold of your brains around this idea that these have to be complementary, not standalone, then it becomes an integrated network. And I think we are slowly groping our way towards that. With Bhutan, it will be multimodal connectivity. They will use their own system that is in place. They don't want to cut down mountains, hills, and forests. They are very conscious of preserving their environment and ecology. And bring up to a point, I think the Dhubri is the point agreed upon, from where they will then take the boats and come. Having said that, we should not lose sight of the historical fact that boats used to come from Bhutan to Narayanganj and Kolkata, but that was about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the rivers have not been used for so long, the rivers have also undergone a process of attrition because of the huge amount of silt coming down. Previously, as long as the boats were plying, the river companies used to dredge every year. And if you keep dredging, you maintain the channel and you do everything else, that stopped. So we have to make up for a lot of damage that we ourselves have done by uprooting this connectivity.
Thank you, Ambassador Karim. I think you're absolutely right. I love the idea of a really holistic approach to interconnectivity, road, rail, and riverways.
Correct.
And as you point out, having let that atrophy for several decades, it's not something which we can completely turn a switch and reestablish again. But certainly, I think it provides a fantastic blueprint for how we should be moving forward. And if the understanding exists in all 4 countries that really that is the direction in which we ought to move, I mean, I think that's certainly good news for this project. High Commissioner, if I could bring the discussion back to you, let's talk a little bit about what are the political, if I may, challenges. I mean, I think part of the problem is, as you have pointed out in all of the literature and reports I've read, make it very clear that this is really win-win-win-win for all of the countries involved. And if you look, if you look at other regions of the world, be it ASEAN to our east, be it Europe, interconnectivity has always been an economic and social boon for the countries involved. You have mentioned how in Bangladesh, in fact, trade with India, if you just look at those two countries alone, could be increased by the order of 300%. National income could go up as much as 18%. I mean, these are huge numbers. And of course, if you add Nepal and Bhutan to that equation, the numbers go up, and the same is true in reverse for all of the countries. Nevertheless, I think that there is, in some quarters, opposition. How do we deal with that, and how do we really sort of move beyond the opposition and explain to the public and convince the public that this is really something which is absolutely squarely in the interests of the people of South Asia?
Excellent question. Look, as it is often said, the old adage says, the proof of the pudding is in the eating.
Right.
So we really have to start showing and being honest about the positive results that are coming from this. If we can showcase, for instance, that in the transportation of goods, either by truck or by rail, in the use of river waters, that local companies are benefiting, that local jobs are being created, that local economies are being sustained as a result of this, then I think we are making an excellent case for expanding that. Let me give you an example, a concrete example of that. In 2020, when the pandemic was first upon us, Ramadan had set in, and for the holy month, the movement of specifically vegetables being used in kitchen markets, chilies, mundane household goods of critical importance to every family. Now, those got stopped because truck services had been stopped. But rail was still working. And so we made a huge push on both sides between BR and Indian Railway to allow for some of these goods to start coming by rail. The net result of that has been that we were increased from practically negligible amounts of goods travel by rail to around 1,600 rakes in the last year, bringing goods between the two countries. Now, what that has done is it has created a vested interest on both sides in the businesses in faster, more predictable, larger volume movements of goods, including things that were earlier not coming by rail, like vehicle chassis for assembly in Bangladesh, for the idea of Bangladesh motor vehicles industry. You'd need some of this for the RMG industry. Now we've also offered to allow the use of containers, empty containers, to go back using Indian railway lines and ports for Bangladesh's exports to diversify the sourcing of transportation opportunities. So too with inland waterways. That's one challenge. The second challenge is to get the narrative right.
Yes.
My fear has been that there has often not been enough votaries of this who go out there and speak in all our countries of why this is a good thing. You see, it's much easier to allow the narrative to be that this is, only one side will benefit, or that, this is somehow going to be to the detriment of some people. Let me say this abundantly clearly on the basis of statistics. Connectivity between India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Nepal will benefit each of us, but honestly speaking, and I'm not saying this in I'm saying this advisedly, Bangladesh will be the biggest beneficiary, because Bangladesh historically was the epicenter of this entire eastern region for connectivity. How do I prove this? Well, very simply. In the just in the year 2017-2018, 99% of all of the cargo that moved on inland waterways was trade driven in Bangladesh, meaning it was international trade from Bangladesh to India. 99% of it was all on Bangladeshi vessels. 1%, less than 1%, was through transit to India, about 4,600 tons of transport. So that's nothing, and even that is paid. Similarly with trucks. All of the truck-based trade essentially supports the entire trucking logistics, the warehousing logistics, the loading and unloading industry out here. So too with railway. So essentially, if you look at it, there is a huge ecosystem that will benefit. If the agreement on the use of Chattogram and Mongla ports is finally put into full use, contrary to what people think it isn't, there's only been one trial run in which a total of 4 containers has moved.
That's right.
So, you know, it was signed in 2015. In 7 years, we moved only 4 containers. It's not exactly exploitation of anybody's opportunity. Who will benefit? It is Bangladeshi trucks that will carry the goods, Bangladeshi insurance companies that will insure the goods, Bangladeshi handling companies that will handle the goods. It will generate, therefore, a significant quantum increase in incomes, plus the cess that is being charged on the use of the roads. So what we really need is more champions to go out there and make the pitch in all our countries about why connectivity is good for us. So, you know, in particular programs like this, thank you, nagoriktv, for actually putting this on and focusing on this issue. Thank you too, Zafar, for all the writings that you've already been doing in the Dhaka Tribune. More power to your pen, and I hope that we have more votaries of the subject in all our countries.
Absolutely. And speaking of votaries, I think you had a point you wanted to bring at this point, Ambassador Karim.
Vikram raised a very, very important point. I think we Bangladeshis also now need to, I mean, having embraced Westphalia, we need to come out of Westphalia.
Yes.
He mentioned about Bangladesh having been historically, from the 18th century onwards, been the epicenter of connectivity. We are essentially a bridging country, a bridging nation.
Yes.
Our value to the world is as a bridge between 2 sub-regions, 2 regions, 2 worlds. We connected Eastern civilizations with the Western civilization. And so we were very good at it until we lost it. Right now, with the focus of the world shifting to the Indo-Pacific, why? Because this is an oceanic world. And if you look at the oceanic world, you look at the 5 oceans, we are right at the epicenter of that oceanic world. If Captain Kirk from up there were to discover this planet suddenly out of the blue, he would see a blue planet, 71% water, with land masses being just blobs floating in these oceans. And so you have the oceans, the 5 oceans, the Indian Ocean right in the center. And in the center of the Indian Ocean is the Bay of Bengal, and Bangladesh is right at the top of it. So in that sense, I look at myself now as occupying a space which is at the epicenter of this oceanic world. There, I think Bangladeshis need to rediscover what this connectivity meant for them historically, where it can take them. And the point he mentioned that, you know, it's a win-win situation. We cannot do anything but win in facilitating connectivity, because in connectivity, our own lifeline gets reinvigorated.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Karim. On that note, thank you. Thank you, High Commissioner Doraiswami, and thank you for tuning in. This show, we have been discussing the spirit, the South Asian spirit, and this is something which here at Nagorik Television, here on this TV show, here the 3 of us, and I think in all of our countries in the region, there are legions of adherents and proponents who really would like to rediscover and go back again to the days where we really were that one region, where we understood that our South Asian identity, our regional identity, was absolutely as key to who we are as individuals and who we are as peoples, as well as, of course, our national identities, which remain important, which, of course, remain paramount in terms of who we are. So hopefully this conversation we have had has advanced this discussion, has advanced this understanding. Thank you very much for your time.